If you enjoy watching Common Ground online, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at lptv.org. Lakeland Public Television presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Welcome to Common Ground. I'm your host, Scott Knudsen. On this episode, follow registered nurse Joe Dahlby as he drives his mule team from Bemidji to Iowa, raising awareness and funds for hospice care.
One of the things that we're doing as part of this venture, I guess, is to try to raise awareness for hospice and palliative care, and then also as another piece of it would be to raise funds. Funding for hospice is always stretched pretty thin, and it's a labor-intensive kind of care, and so there's always need, and we'd like to help, support financially as well. So we are accepting donations both to our local hospice here in Bemidji, but as we travel south, we're going to hopefully be able to collect donations and get them to the hospice organization that is closest or supports that particular community. I've always kind of been interested in mules. My father was older, he was 65 when I was born, and so he was part of the horse and buggy days, I guess. He was born in 1888, and about early 1900s, he homesteaded in Watford City, North Dakota with a team of mules. And of course I wasn't around then, but I have a picture of him. And then I've gotten to know some people that have had mules, and I just kind of appreciated them as being a little different than horses. I've trained a lot of horses and I've had a lot of horses, but mules are different. And so I thought, well, one of my bucket list things is going to be to train a team of mules. And then I started thinking about this trip to my hometown down in Iowa. And fortunately enough, Earl sort of had the same interest, and he's from that general vicinity, so we kind of tag teamed, and we've been talking about this for a couple of years. And it finally just came together this year between personal circumstances, and then the mules were coming along enough where they would do the trip and hopefully in good shape.
I like horses or mules, it doesn't really matter. And I thought it was a fun thing to do. So I asked Joe if he needed a partner, and he said, yeah. I have draft horses.
Draft horses, yeah. It's got a nice bunch of horses. I've had a long-standing passion for hospice and palliative care. I worked at North Country Health Services for about 26 years. I was more or less involved in the administrative side of things. I am an RN, but I was involved actively early on when hospice became part of the hospital, and I just saw how much positive they created from the standpoint of families and patients. I've had personal experiences with neighbors and friends who've had the opportunity to receive service from hospice, and I've just been so impressed with the whole philosophy, with helping people with pain and symptom management and helping them work through things, whether it's spirituality or family dynamics or whatever, and giving them what we always called the good death, or trying to at least. And so that's sort of the big picture here, is doing something to kind of carry that message to the public and raise awareness about hospice and palliative care. I've been working with these mules for a couple of years, and they are different than horses. They're a lot smarter, and they reason, which some people look at me cross-eyed when I say that, but they really do put things together, and so you have to be pretty gentle with them. You can't be physical with them. They're kind of unforgiving. They'll remember something that you did to them. So you have to kind of just try to get to understand them, and it's a lot of it's the relationship and them getting to know you and you getting to know them, and that takes a while. So it's to say, I guess I wouldn't try to train a team of mules and say I could do it in 6 months even. I think like I said, I've been working with these mules for 2 years, and we still got a ways to go. The benefit, I guess, in mule context is that they live a long time. These mules will be around unless they get something major wrong with them. They'll be around much longer than I will. I've known people that had mules that were still working when they were pushing 40 years old. They have a lot of longevity. And once they learn something, they've got it. But of course that cuts both ways. If they learn bad habits, they'll take on those as well. So it's a challenge, but it's been really fun. I've enjoyed most all of it. Well, we're putting the bridles on them, the bits in their mouth, and getting them bridled up. That's obviously part of the harnessing process. The bits and the bridles are basically what you use to control them or get them to go where you want them to go and whatnot. This is sometimes one of the harder things for them to get used to, but these guys are doing pretty good. Hopefully by the end of the trip they'll be so accustomed to it that it will be just second nature. But just this bridle has a blinker or blinders on it, so it basically keeps the mule from having peripheral vision and doesn't spook them from behind. What I found out when I was driving this mule is that I said maybe she'd do better if she can see behind. Now, horses and mules have tremendous peripheral vision. They can see they can almost see a fly on their butt, on their backside. But like I say, the blinders keep this one from seeing back there, or this one I have what's called an open bridle without the blinders on, and he just seems to work better that way. So people will sometimes ask why the difference, and sometimes it's just trial and error and what seems to work better. So they really come together kind of as one, and they really match their pace, together, and particularly after they've been driven for a while, they come together usually very nicely. These are the lines. That's what connects your hands basically to the control of the animal. When you're riding a horse, you call them reins, and when you're driving a horse, you call them lines. And when I'm working with new people, I always give them a hard time if they make the mistake and call them reins. I tell them the Teamsters are going to make fun of you if you do that. So, sort of a joke, but it's just a difference in terminology. Come on, step over. Step over. I don't shout. I only shout if I'm mad at them. I mean, if they do something wrong, and then you have to be so careful. They're kind of unforgiving, so you try not to be physical with them. They do get a scolding when they do something wrong, and they do take that to heart pretty good usually. They're pretty sensitive. These mules are still young. Some people have told me they don't even start training a mule until they're 6. Well, obviously I started earlier, just because they kind of get their head together a little bit more as they age. And I know the same thing with horses. A lot of times we'll say when we're training 2-year-olds that by the time they're 4 is when they really turn into a pretty good horse as far as training and whatnot. So a mule is a hybrid. Typically it's a cross between a male donkey and then usually out of a horse mare. Now it can go the other way where it can be a jenny donkey and a stallion horse, but that's more atypical. It's mostly the other way. They're sterile, and so they don't reproduce. Most people would relate to seeing mules packing like out in the mountains. They're very sure-footed. They're fairly easy keepers as far as feed and food. They're very steady. You see them walking up mountain trails that are just very narrow and they're sheer drop-off on one side, and they'll do that all day long. So they're kind of unique that way. They have some other characteristics that are unique to them as well. Horses can overeat and get sick. Mules typically won't. They'll just eat what they need and then they'll quit. So there are some pretty unique characteristics about mules. They're just a little bit different personality, and you kind of have to think a little differently when you're driving them from the standpoint of kind of understand what they might be thinking about, where probably horses are not quite as complex, an animal. I would say that one of the uniquenesses about these mules is that they're big, and what they're breeding is, of course, we call it a mammoth jack, which is a big donkey, and then they're out of Percheron mares, so they're bred out of big stock, and that's how you get these mules are 17 hands, which is pretty good size. So that's what makes them big, because you can get mules that are pony-sized mules even, depending what the breeding is, but these are called draft mules basically, and they're Percheron cross mules. So, and they're still kind of young. They're 4 and 5, so they've got quite a few years ahead of them. Typically a horse that's 20 years old is getting up there. I've seen mules that are 20 years old that still sell for a good price, because they just figure they've got a lot of years left in them. Where a horse that's 20 years old, you're kind of thinking they better be put to light duty probably, or getting close to it. We've been contemplating how we would get from here to southern Minnesota and avoid big cities and avoid interstate highways and so forth. We actually were able to, through a friend, acquire a couple of state atlases, which then county by county, they show all the details of the roads and trails and whatnot. So we sat down here just actually last Sunday night and we just did a detail map of the route, but we'll stay between 71 on the west side and Highway 10 on the east side. And same way going down on 64, we'll stay between 10 and 64. So if you can imagine that kind of a corridor that goes right down through there. So we'll avoid St. Cloud. I know we go through like Litchfield and several smaller towns and whatnot. The benefit of going through towns is that we'll be able to resupply, probably we hope to, because we'll need to pick up some milk and eggs and maybe some mule feed and so forth. But we want to kind of avoid just the heavy traffic and whatnot. Just don't want to have any problems. We will have some safety precautions. We're going to have an amber flashing light on the top of the wagon and so forth, so we'll hopefully stay safe. And the mules are good with traffic, but you just never know. You want to make sure it stays that way. So, but yeah, the route will be, if you drew a line from here to Fairmont, Minnesota, we're trying to stay as straight as we can along that corridor. And then when we get down to Fairmont, we'll head east and then across the Minnesota border into Iowa. And then my hometown is only about 15 miles into Iowa. We know we won't be able to carry everything that we need, so we're trying to figure out some ways to resupply ourselves along the way. We've got a couple of friends who are willing to drive down and deliver us some feed, but we'll haul a few bales of hay on the wagon, and then we're going to use what's called a complete feed. It's a pelletized feed in a sack, 50-pound sack. But even that, it'll take several bags, so probably wouldn't be able to carry all that we needed, so we'll have to rely on feed stores or others that would come down from Bemidji to resupply us and whatnot. We do have some friends, acquaintances along the way. I've got a sister that lives in Wilmer. We have some friends down by Long Prairie, and we have some friends down further south that have already said they'll help us. And I've read several internet accounts of people that have done these kinds of things with horses or mules, and this is probably relatively small because there's people that have gone coast to coast and north to south, the whole country. And they said the least problem is you have a lot of people that stop and like to check in and visit, and then people are very generous with what they can do to support you, as far as running and getting feed or doing whatever you might need. So we'll rely on the generosity of the public as well along the way to hopefully be able to give us a little bit of support where we need it. And we'll have cell phones. We're going to sleep in a tent. Actually, we have a heavy canvas, kind of a packing tent, or what they would use out in Colorado probably for elk hunting or whatever. And so we'll be able to set that up every night. It's big enough where we can be comfortable. We'll sleep on cots, so we'll be up off the ground. And these old bones wouldn't tolerate sleeping on the ground, I don't think so. And then we'll have a heater. We'll actually be able to, warm the tent up, and if we need it, which looks like we will, we'll have a small generator that will be able to run the heater and also charge a battery so we can keep our cell phones working. I will be blogging as well. I have a daughter down in Rochester that's kind of helping me with that, and we're going to try to keep the people interested and be able to follow our progress and enter a few anecdotes, hopefully, of people we meet and so forth. And this trip, Earl and I have spent some time planning our meals. Probably nothing too fancy, but we do have quite a bit of Spam along. And we are going to have a cooler, so we're hoping to have some other meats. And we have a few convenience foods, but I think we'll cook meat and potatoes and breakfast. We'll have toast and maybe eggs and maybe some Spam. It is reminiscent of how the early settlers came to the area and so forth, covered wagons and of course the mules. And I've read quite a bit, and of course we've done covered wagon rides before, so we've kind of had a feel for how that is and what you have to do to keep everything going. And the wagon actually is the traditional old wooden wheel wagon, which means you have to periodically take the big bolt off the side of the wheel and slide the wheel out and put grease on the axle so everything stays slippery, I guess. And we'll have to be careful with maintaining the mules there so they don't get hurt. And one of the things that can happen when you're on a long ride is they can actually get sore shoulders. And so every day we'll be washing them down with salt water, and it kind of toughens the skin and whatnot. We'll just have to watch. I've seen where they actually get almost like blisters and they really break down. I've seen it just raw meat even where it's just broken down. It'd be just like an athlete, I suppose, with a bad fitting shoe or something. And so we have to be particularly mindful of that. And that's what the early settlers had to deal with too. They had to make sure that they kept their animals fit along the way, because that was what they relied on to get there.
My name is Tim Kunz. I'm a farrier and I'm here to shoe Rufus and Rowdy, and I guess Joe and Earl are going to be going on a 300-mile trip, so we're putting on some specialty shoes and to get them through that trip. The shoes are just a common keg shoe. We take a basic keg shoe, weld on grade 8 bolts for wear. So when the foot hits, it'll land on these bolts and not wear the shoe off in the 300 miles that they're going. Whereas you can put Drill Tech or Boreum or things like that on them that would protect the shoe from the road and wearing off. And this is an inexpensive way to accomplish that. And it doesn't hinder being able to bend the shoe or whatnot, but you can use it for elevation of heels, where an elevated heel shoe would run $30 a set, whereas this is a fraction of that price just to accomplish the same thing. That's what we opted to do. Well, which one do you want to do first?
Why don't you just take it off from there?
This one here. This is the first time these mules have been shoed. And they're not dangerous with the front ones, it's the hind ones I'm worried about. So we'll see how things go. Mules can kick every different direction. They can kick you forward, then kick you backwards, then kick you out to the side. I had the front foot of a mule up. He used myself as a pendulum to hold himself up, and he went, kicked me in the forehead. They're different animals. Horses aren't going to do it. Mules they're just a little bit more temperamental. They're just a different critter. If you pinch on their leg to make them pick it up, they take it offensively. Well, first, obviously, you clean it out and you trim the frog so that you can level your heels to your foot. You trim it, take your rasp, level it, size your shoe, and you put your nails in and you cut them off with this, the claw end of the hammer. Then you use, this is an anvil, so that when you hit the nail, this sets the nail into the hoof. And then when you're done with that, on the nail, you file underneath it and use this tool that clinches it over and sets it back into the hoof so that it doesn't catch on things or wear off. Just kind of sets it back up into the foot.
Horses, mules are pretty treacherous on ice. They don't have they really flounder. But if you put drill tech or grade 8 bolts or borium, and then just when you're putting it on, you can make a kind of a point to it, and then it'll be like like cleats on a football shoe. Hey, settle down now.
One shoe. One shoe, 4 nails.
One shoe, 7 to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that it's important for us to be able to be good ambassadors for hospice and palliative care from the standpoint of just raising awareness. I think there's still some reluctance sometimes to consider hospice care because it feels like it's, well, you're saying I'm going to die. Well, we're all going to die. And none of us are going to avoid it. And so to me, it kind of gets back to how can we get people to think about hospice care as a good alternative when the time comes that you've got weeks or months yet to live and so forth and so on, because it is good care. I know that hospice, for the most part, just has a wonderful reputation, and I know the staff, particularly the ones in Bemidji that have worked in hospice over the years, and they're some of the best. I mean, I worked with a lot of staff at the hospital back when I was the vice president of nursing in the hospital here, and you know, we had all good staff, but it seemed like the nurses that gravitated and the other staff that gravitated to hospice just had that special ability to connect with people on a personal level and relate to what the patient was going through and the family was going through and so forth and so on. So again, if we can raise awareness and help people become more comfortable with considering hospice, because it's a very good thing. Well, traditional medicine, and I'll say that this is evolving much more in a positive way, I think, but when I started out in nursing back in the 70s, medical care was curative, and you went to the hospital to get fixed, to have surgery, to get over your pneumonia, to be treated with drugs and whatever the latest technology was. And we didn't do as good a job at helping people to die. And so I think that there's been a movement out there that's been going on for a few years now, but it still needs to evolve in the right way, is the idea that at some point in time we have to accept our own inevitable death, and then we need to think about how are we going to prepare for that from the standpoint of our families, whether it be spirituality or And then, of course, the medical part of it, which is always going to be there, and how can we best manage the symptoms that are hard for people to deal with, and whether it be, pain management or sometimes it's nausea and so forth and so on. And what's good about hospice and palliative care is that they really have the tools. They've worked with this for so long that they are experts. And even in the acute care setting in the hospital, we would many times call a hospice nurse over to help us manage a patient who is just having a real difficult time with pain, for instance. And so there's a whole expertise, a body of knowledge there, and a group of experts who just really have worked with that part of it for years and have become just very capable. It's compassionate, it's helping families to cope, it's helping the patient to manage their symptoms and pain control, and I've just seen it work so well in many, many cases that I've personally been aware of.
Thanks for watching. Join us again on Common Ground.
If you have an idea for a Common Ground piece that pertains to North Central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call us at 218-333-3014. To view any episode of Common Ground online, visit us at lptv.org. To order episodes or segments of Common Ground, call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people November 4th, 2008. If you enjoyed this episode of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org.